I remember the exact moment I heard about the place. It was late evening, rain hammering against the broken windows of an old bar just outside the zone. Some stranger, face hidden in the shadows, leaned across the table and whispered about a village that never died, a village that drowned yet still rang its church bell at night. They called it the Damned Village. And at its center, hidden beneath dark waters, stood a church that refused to stay buried. Most stalkers dismissed it as just another ghost story meant to scare rookies, but I felt something different in those words. A pull, like the place was already calling me. 2 nights later, I packed my gear and set out alone. The path wasn't marked on any map. I followed fragments of stories, directions scratched into ruined bus stops, and strange carvings on trees that looked almost recent. For hours, I trekked through swamp and forest until the ground itself grew soft, each step sinking deeper into mud. The air smelled of rust and rot. My Geiger counter ticked lightly, nothing serious, but enough to remind me this wasn't ordinary land. Then I saw it. The water stretched before me like a black mirror, swallowing what must have once been a village. The tops of a few houses still poked above the surface, roofs sagging under moss, chimneys leaning at unnatural angles. And there, rising crookedly from the center of the flood, was the steeple of a church. Half submerged, broken, but undeniably real. That's when I heard it. A bell, deep, echoing, impossibly loud for a building that should have been silent for centuries. My blood froze. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't metal shifting. It was a toll, measured and slow, rolling across the water as if the church itself was breathing. I should have left then, but I didn't. I strapped my flashlight to my shoulder and started wading in. The water was freezing, thick with silt that pulled at my boots. With every step, I felt something brushing against my legs. Branches, maybe, or broken beams. But sometimes it felt like hands. The closer I got, the darker the water became, until it reflected nothing at all. I reached the church's doors, or what remained of them. The wood was swollen, blackened, as though burned under water. With a hard shove, they creaked open, and a wave of stench rolled out. Mold, decay, and something else I can't even describe. Inside, the water only reached my waist. Shafts of pale moonlight cut through the broken ceiling, revealing pews floating like corpses. Candles still clung to rusted holders, though no flame burned. And at the far end, beneath the shadow of a collapsed crucifix, was the altar. I don't know what I expected. Bones, relics, nothing at all. But what I found was worse. A book, a massive waterlogged Bible lying open on the altar, its pages intact, untouched by rot. As I reached for it, the bell tolled again, this time deafening, as if it rang inside my skull. The pews shifted, the water rippled, and then I saw them. Faces, pale, bloated, staring up from beneath the black surface, eyes open and watching. I froze, staring down at the faces under the water. They weren't moving, but they weren't still either. Their eyes followed me, rolling just beneath the surface, mouths slowly opening and closing like they were whispering something I couldn't hear. The instinct to run nearly tore me apart, but my legs refused to move. The water pressed against me, heavier than before, like it was trying to keep me inside. I forced my gaze away from the faces and back to the altar. The book was still there, dry as if untouched by time, its words written in an alphabet I didn't recognize. The letters twisted on the page, curling like smoke, reshaping themselves every time I blinked. And then I heard voices, not just in my head, real voices, dozens of them, rising up from the water, murmuring in a chorus of sorrow and rage. My flashlight flickered. The crucifix above the altar groaned and shifted, its nailed figure cracking apart as if it wanted to climb down. I don't remember deciding to touch the book, but my hand reached out on its own. The moment my fingers brushed the page, the bell above let out a final, shattering toll. The sound knocked me to my knees. The water surged violently, and all those pale faces rose higher, breaking the surface, dripping black water from their open mouths. They weren't corpses. They weren't alive either. Something between. The villagers, trapped, condemned. One of them, an old man with empty sockets where his eyes should have been, lurched forward, his face inches from mine, his jaw unhinged with a sickening crack, and in a voice like stone grinding against metal, he whispered, "Read." My body burned with cold. I stumbled back, shaking my head, but the book pulled at me. The words shifted faster, aligning into something I suddenly understood. It wasn't scripture. It was a record. Names, dates, events, the history of the village, rewritten. I saw visions behind my eyes, a time when this place was alive, a thriving settlement, farmers, children, laughter in the streets. Then came the famine, the sickness, and finally, the priest, a man who promised salvation, but salvation meant sacrifice. He led the villagers into the church and sealed the doors. They prayed as the waters rose, and the bell rang with every drowning breath. And now, centuries later, they were still here, waiting for someone to finish their prayer. I felt my lips moving, reading aloud from the cursed book, even though I didn't want to. The villagers leaned closer with every word, their rotting teeth clattering in anticipation. The water was up to my chest now, climbing higher, even though the church shouldn't have held that much. That's when I snapped out of it. With all my strength, I tore my hand away from the book. The voices screamed, shrill and furious, shaking the walls of the church. I shoved through the water, splashing toward the broken doors. Behind me, the bell tolled once more. But this time, it was different, faster, desperate.
I pushed outside into the freezing night air, gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably. The water was still rising, now spilling out of the church and spreading across the village. In the moonlight, I saw more rooftops vanish beneath the surface. The land was sinking. I didn't wait to see what came next. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran. Branches tore at my clothes, mud sucked at my boots, and the trees twisted in the dark like they were trying to close the path behind me. But the bell followed. Each toll slammed into my chest, closer, louder, though I was miles from the church. I finally collapsed on a ridge overlooking the flooded valley. My chest burned, my hands shook, and my Geiger counter ticked erratically, as if the air itself had soured. Below me, the village was almost gone, swallowed whole by black water. Only the church steeple remained, crooked, defiant against the moonlight. And then it rang again. The steeple cracked in half. The bell fell, plunging into the water with a thunderous splash that sent waves racing toward the shore. But instead of sinking, the bell floated. No, it rose, higher and higher, dripping shadows instead of water, turning in midair as if pulled by invisible chains. The faces of the drowned villagers surfaced all around the bell, hundreds of them staring up at me. Their voices merged into one, a single guttural chant that made my bones ache. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The sound wasn't meant for human ears. And then they saw me. The water surged toward the ridge, impossibly fast, climbing uphill like a living thing. I scrambled backward, slipping on wet soil as the black tide crashed at my feet. Hands shot out of it, skeletal, pale, clawing at the ground. They weren't trying to pull me under, they were trying to drag themselves out. I fired my rifle into the dark mass, each shot vanishing without a sound. The hands kept coming. Faces tore through the water, jaws stretching open, screaming silently as they clawed toward me. I turned to run again, but something stopped me. The book. It was still in my pack. I hadn't realized I'd carried it out of the church. The weight of it pulled at me like an anchor. That's when it hit me. They weren't after me. They were after the book. With shaking hands, I pulled it free. The cover writhed beneath my fingers, wet and warm like living skin. The chanting grew louder, the drowned villagers climbing closer, their hands reaching for me. For it. I understood now. This book bound them, held them in that eternal curse. If I destroyed it, maybe I could end this. I ripped open my pack for my lighter. My hands barely worked, but I sparked the flame, pressed it to the corner of the book. For a moment, nothing happened. The page resisted, slick and damp. But then it caught, slowly at first, then all at once, fire racing across the words, consuming the twisting letters. The reaction was immediate. The chanting turned to screams, furious and deafening. The water convulsed, throwing waves high into the trees. The hands clawed at me desperately, but began to dissolve into mist. One by one, the faces blurred, their eyes melting into black nothing. The bell crashed to the earth with a final hollow clang, shattering into rusted fragments. The water receded, pulling back toward the church in a violent whirlpool. In less than a minute, the valley was nothing but mud and ruins again. No villagers, no church, nothing. I stood there, shaking, the burning book crumbling into ash in my hands. The screams faded, replaced by silence. A silence so deep it rang louder than any bell. I don't remember walking back. I only remember waking up at dawn, far from the valley, covered in mud. My pack was gone, my rifle gone, and on my palm, burned into my skin, was the mark of a bell.
I never told anyone what happened that night, but sometimes, when the world is quiet, I still hear it. A single toll, faint, distant, calling me back to the damned village. It's been weeks since I escaped that valley. I told myself it was over, that burning the book ended everything. But last night, I woke up to a sound I swore I'd never hear again.
A bell. It was faint at first, drifting through the night air like a dream, but then it grew louder. I rushed to the window, and in the distance, across the tree line, I saw light, pale golden light, shimmering like reflections on water. And there it was, the steeple, rising once more, half submerged, half broken, but real. The damned church had returned, and this time it wasn't waiting in silence.
The bell tolled again. Not one strike, not two. It rang over and over, faster, louder, like it was calling not just to me, but to everyone. I shut the curtains. I tried to cover my ears, but the sound didn't stop. It wasn't in the world anymore. It was in my head. I don't know how much longer I can resist it. My hands are shaking as I record this. My gear is already packed, though I don't remember packing it. The damned village is calling me back, and I think next time it won't let me leave.